Hey, so we have got a bunch of us here in WIM conversation land today. Usually it's just Linda and me and one other guest, but there's a lot of us that are excited to speak about the metamodernism in everything, everywhere, all at once. And in it seems to have kind of been accepted on a big level with its big wins in the Academy Awards, and we want to talk about that as well. Um, and I'll just introduce everybody. Linda and I are the editors of a website called whatismetamodern.com. And Nate has been a contributor to our website and written about Fleabag. And Gage created all of the art and design for our poster for the Seattle Metamodernism Summit, which was held recently, and is also a member of a Facebook group that we have with Nate. Also, Zebediah attended and presented about metamodern zombies at that conference. And Nate, I think you brought the movie to my attention before it was even released. You were just kind of intrigued and excited by the trailer for it.
Yeah, I saw the trailer and I had read a review. I think it premiered at Cannes, and the review and the trailer both kind of struck me as metamodern, specifically, I think, with the kind of like effusive genre um, production and the like rapid editing, um, and just the sense of genres not, I guess, collapsing in on the characters without their control. That felt very metamodern to me.
Can you say more about what you mean by the last thing?
Yeah. So in the film, um, the main character played by Michelle Yeoh, Evelyn, she is just trying to get her taxes done and have a Chinese New Year celebration, but she gets kind of involved with um, alternative universes, versions of herself, and the other characters around her that are going to these different genre references. So martial arts films, romantic comedies, um, and she is not kind of choosing this life versus I think a postmodern perspective would much more have the character in control of those genre flips, um, and she is kind of put into it, and it feels to me like being on the internet is just like as you're scrolling and you don't know what post you're going to get next.
Hmm. And then, okay, I'm kind of telling this from my point of view of encountering the movie. So then, Gage, you were the one who kind of rushed into our group excited after you'd actually seen the movie. And how did you react? How did it feel to you to see that movie?
So I had actually known about the Daniels, the directors of the film, for quite a while because I knew that they had come out with Swiss Army Man, which was their first film. And when I saw the trailer for that, I was like, this is very strange, not something I've ever seen before. If you haven't seen it, it contains a farting corpse that has magic powers and a bunch of just wild things. And I was like, I need to see this. But one of my fears going into that film was that with its sort of wild premise and maybe sort of like crude adult humor, that it would be also sort of like super cynical or bitter or have some other kind of flavor to that. But I was like, I walked out of the theater like amazed at how not only just like not cynical it was, but how like extremely sincere. And it was this like its main thesis was about radical acceptance. So when I heard that they were coming out with another film, I knew that I had to go see it and was hoping that it would have some semblance of that same like heart mixed with just insanity.
So
And
thing you were describing was Swiss Army.
Swiss Army Man, yes, which was their first film. And so I was hoping that they would have some semblance of that going into this new film. And not only did they have it, but it was so much of it that it was almost overwhelming. So, I mean, I was very pleased.
And Zebediah, when we heard you present at the Seattle Metamodernism Summit, you talked a lot about Swiss Army Man. I keep wanting to say Swiss Army knife, but that's the joke.
Yeah, actually, Swiss Army Man is the reason that I became a metamodernism scholar. When I saw the movie was coming out, I saw that Dan Rad was in it, and I saw that Paul Dano was in it, and I was like, this seems like a really interesting film. That's the kind of thing that I'm in for. And I didn't really have the language for it yet, but I went and saw it in the theater, and it was a packed theater, and there were just moments during the movie where the experience of watching that film in a theater was so unique, and just like this catharsis that people were going through, this really sincere reaction to just an absurd film. And at the end, there was like a collective sigh of relief, and like at least a dozen people verbally responded and just said like some version of like, what the fuck was that? And I looked over, and my partner, she's just crying hysterically at the end of this movie. And like, what kind of fart movie makes that happen, right? So then I started questioning that, and I was taking a class on Chaucer actually at the time, just for fun. It was a gamifying Chaucer class where we were just talking about Chaucer and all these different theories and stuff. And I brought the film up, and my professor was like, "Oh, that sounds like this thing that one of my students is working on with Metamodernism." And so then he gave me an article, and I read the Van den Acker article from like 2010, I think. And then I just got like really into it, and I applied to grad school, and then here I am. And I owe it to the Daniels. And so I was well aware of Everything Everywhere All at Once before it came out, and was looking forward to it. And I went on day one, and I bought the hot dog fingers, and I was gonna wear them today, and I forgot. Yeah.
Have you ever worn hot dog fingers like to a party or something?
At my house, yeah.
Just wear them around the house.
I invited people over to watch the movie, and I was wearing the hot dog fingers.
Okay.
Like, you'll get this in an hour.
So yeah, I was excited for when it came out because the trailer definitely seemed metamodern and just weird and strange, and like it was going to be a really good movie. And then I went, and it's one of the few movies that I went to the theater to see since pandemic. And my experience was that the first time I saw it, there was so much coming at me that I think it hypnotized me, and it literally made me fall asleep. And I woke up, and I was aware that I had fallen asleep, but I didn't know how long I had been asleep, so it was very disorienting, and I liked it a lot, but I knew that I didn't completely understand it. So then I went back and saw it again like the next day or 2 days later. And now the plot made a lot more sense. And I also just was aware that regardless of whether I'd been hypnotized or not, there's so much in it that you can't even take it all in one viewing. You can possibly get the overall feel and take a lot of it in, but it bears repeat watching 2 times, 3 times. And this is coming from someone that does not normally see movies, more than once. I'm not that kind of a fanboy like some people are. Yeah, and Linda, what was?
Yeah, I think that's something that happened to me as well. Honestly, I fell asleep watching it the first time out of overwhelm, I'm pretty sure. And I think that's something that makes it all the more interesting that it garnered so many accolades, because as you say, you might have to sit through it once, twice, or more to really even take in what else is going on. So it speaks to possibly, a lot of different movements in contemporary culture that I just really found myself wanting to bold underline, this win at the Oscars for this film is a win for metamodernism. It means metamodernism has just become accepted on a level that people aren't even necessarily remarking on it. And I guess what I mean by that is the last film that seemed to invoke anything you might call metamodern that won a major award, an Oscar anyway, was Wes Anderson's Grand Budapest Hotel in 2015. And that at the time had people saying, you know, it's about time for Wes Anderson, but also it's kind of like, this is a weird movie. This is a weird aesthetic. We're not sure what to make of it. And so we're glad / surprised that it won and that it was recognized and stuff. But we've, as Greg and I have talked about it a number of times on our, in various articles on what is metamodern, there just seems to be well, feels like a long history, but it's not a long history. It's like a decade and a half of people talking about metamodernism, critics, I mean, bringing up things that are, they're specifically delineating metamodernism without knowing about the word. So they'll be talking about the quirky, they'll be talking about the tiny and the epic, or the use of these odd aesthetics, but not with this kind of like bewildered, befuddled feeling behind it. Like, we don't know what this is and we're not sure what to make of it. And this is the first time that we actually got to see one of the makers actually acknowledge, as Greg wrote about in his piece on what is metamodern, acknowledge that metamodernism was a thing that was guiding in some way, was part of the aesthetic of a film. So this is a really big deal in some ways that I just really wanted to hear us talk about and call out.
And what was interesting about that article, it was on Mashable. I don't remember the author's name, sorry, but it was on Mashable, and the word metamodernism comes up with Daniel Kwan actually correcting the interviewer. The interviewer is struggling to find a way to describe the film, and she comes up with the term poignant postmodernism. And Daniel Kwan says, well, actually, I would call it metamodern. And then he gives a little explanation, and the aspect of metamodernism that he had in mind was that the film is chock full of intertextuality, references to other films, references to genre, and yet he makes the point that they don't do this just to be cheeky, but they do it in order to kind of connect with the audience over the way we're all living in a world of intertextuality and of media saturation. And then in the same kind of area in that article, the other Daniel talks about the movie both being very silly, but also very heartfelt, and that they wanted to bring those things together. And that's another part of metamodernism to me.
Just talking about the braiding of these different categories, genre. One of the articles that I read in The Guardian that was reflecting on, there were articles saying why this film should win, and then there are articles afterwards saying why this film did win, trying to break down why this film won the Oscar. And one of those articles was talking about that the various vicissitudes that were put through in the film might be, quote, dismissed as mere gimmicks if the film didn't have any heart to it. And that really can tell us something, because if all those gimmicks that were put through, there's this multiverse and there's, these googly eye rock characters, etc. If it's not okay for them to be mere gimmicks, then that means something about postmodernism. We have in fact tired of gimmicks for gimmicks' sake, and we really do crave the heart that's behind what this stuff might mean on some other level. And so it says, if you take away the eye-popping visuals, multiverse battles, spectacular martial arts choreography, it boils down to a wholesome universal story about family and the healing power of love and kindness. So that aesthetic, I think, is what a lot of these other critics are suggesting made it both a dark horse, an underdog because of its simplicity, but it also just gave it this incredible oomph and this buoyancy to otherwise more of a stodgy, traditionalist kind of crowd of viewers. But I still find it really fascinating. Like, I understand it in terms.
Featured Asian actors, and it was a film that featured actors who have been, maybe considered has-beens, so to speak, or never, almost never beens, kind of actors who've been on the periphery of the industry, and they were given a chance, and did really well with this film. And did you all watch the Oscars? Yeah. And it seemed like the way I read the audience reactions in the Oscars was like, even though there were a bunch of other great films and great, nominees in various categories, that the whole crowd seemed to kind of be on the side of everything, everywhere, all at once, in a unique way. Like it wasn't just a film winning, it was something more than that to a lot of people, but I'm not sure how to articulate that.
That's what I feel like I'm trying to put my hands around too, is it's not just a film winning, it's an aesthetic that's winning.
Yeah, it did definitely seem, watching, and it's the first Oscars I've ever watched, actually. And I only watched it because of the Daniels. I probably won't watch another one unless they're nominated again. Or another metamodernist film is nominated like this. But watching it, I was really struck by just the entire, like it was obvious that everybody wanted them to win. And it was not just because of this film, which I don't think would have been very popular had it not been for this really broad cultural movement to accepting this kind of artwork. But I think that to go back to talking about the actors and the fact that it's in multiple languages and it's an indie film that only had a $15 million budget, I think those things are part of that really sort of intensely emotional and sincere referentiality, right? So seeing, Short Round as a main character having this comeback story in this movie and doing just such a great job, I think that helps the film. I think it helps make that metamodern sense of feeling, that like sincere reference to other works and other things that we're all aware of, because everybody loves, Indiana Jones from childhood, and probably wondered at some point in their lives, where did this kid who played Short Round go, right? But didn't necessarily know. And now we know, right? And that's sort of a really important part of the whole thing. So you're muted.
I was just interjecting for people who don't know that that actor was Waymond in this film. The father in the family, who was kind of atypically, he was kind of like, he wasn't in the standard kind of male hero role. He was the kind of helpmate spouse who stood for sensitivity and kindness and things like that, sort of in juxtaposition to his very determined wife, who was a get her done kind of person.
I'd expand on how they present his kindness, because he's, I think specifically in an Asian American context, the like feminization of Asian men has been like a big issue, and so him as an actor is used to kind of embody that from the start. And then it's revealed in a sequence that's referencing Wong Kar-wai, like this more intelligent reason for being kind and for his role in this family dynamic. And I think that's where it felt. I'm like resistant to metamodernism just being like, people are nice, because there's a review for Junebug, and I think Amy Adams' character in Junebug is a very similar representation of a kind of kindness that's more nuanced and complex and effortful, even if she presents as naive. But it says like she's surrounded by an intelligent kindness, and I really like that phrase for a metamodern perspective on it. And then I also thinking in the Asian context, I think that's a big reason the movie was also really important to people. Is it felt like Michelle Kwan had like been working for years and is well regarded and hadn't even been nominated, um, and I think that had a lot of backing. It felt like this was the opportunity. There was Minari a few years ago, that had some Oscar nominations but wasn't going to win Best Picture. It was a little too niche, not as big of a film as this one. And so this felt like the perfect vehicle to represent these narratives in this really influential piece of Hollywood, but because it was a global influence, these people weren't being acknowledged in the same vein as people who were directly in Hollywood. So the Hong Kong movie scene, which gets referenced throughout everything, everywhere. I think this was the opportunity to recognize that. And in relationship to metamodernism, I think that globalization and understanding of dynamics as being more interrelated than we've had kind of the infrastructure to acknowledge in the past is something the movie thematically represents, and then its win thematically represents.
Yeah, I guess teeing off on that a little bit as far as themes that seem to have a place now that maybe didn't before is this idea of the multiverse just being sort of presented to us like, yeah, that's a thing. And that to me finds its place in the world today because of the time that we're living in which we do live in what I sometimes call fluid identity narratives. So we can be this person on this social media platform and that's another person on another platform. And that's an expected thing to do. And it's expected to sort of swap those out back and forth. And that we sort of accept that is the way we live now. So suddenly we can talk about a multiverse and a place in which realities collide and really feel that that's something we can feel is real. That's a way that we actually do live. So that's the part of metamodernism that reflects not, something aspirational or something prescriptive, but actually how the felt reality, how it feels like a multiverse to us in a lot of ways, so we can understand that.
I think during one of the award speeches, Daniel Kwan even said something along the lines of, I worry that stories nowadays aren't keeping up the pace of like what our society needs for stories. And so I think that that's notable, especially when talking about the idea of metamodernism being sort of like accepted by the Academy as this aesthetic that, yeah, I just think that's interesting. And I hope the trend does continue.
I remember that moment in his acceptance speech too. And what's occurring to me now as I think about it was it came across because he said, like, I hope we're keeping up. And when you think about it, that concern is not something that I think like most people would have on their minds. But he said it as if it's kind of been like an ongoing conversation, either in his own head or among the people who he talks with. And I'm just thinking of this right now, so I don't know exactly why I think that's connected to metamodernism per se, but I think it at least reflects him being kind of like immersed in a quest to make sense of everything that's going on, everything everywhere all at once, in our reality, and somehow sees his job as a filmmaker to partially have something to do with navigating that for himself and for his audiences. And I was just thinking also too how like, people talk about it as being a film that supports representation of the Asian American culture. And it's also a coming out story. And it's a, and in both of the, which is another kind of representation. In both of those cases, though, I think that the representation is made stronger by the fact that that's not what the film is mainly about. Like the film is not have the sole mission of representing the Asian American experience, nor does it have the sole mission of modeling family acceptance of alternate sexual identities within and things like that. Those things just happen sort of as par for the course in a story about the multiverse, you know. And then it's just kind of like, oh yeah, well, of course, a family is going to maybe have this aspect to them, and a family is going to maybe have that aspect, and that's just kind of part of everything now. So I thought that was cool too. And again, somehow I think that's a sort of meta-modern approach to representation.
Yeah, one of my favorite points that you make in your article on what is metamodern, Greg, is you say, introducing my cat, you say the film isn't simply celebrating being everything everywhere all at once. It's exploring how to live with that multiplied reality humanely. That just really puts a fine point on it. It's not trying to glorify or have a stopping point at, isn't the cosmic truth of things amazing or scary or nihilistic or whatever. It's bringing it back down to the human level, back down to what does it actually mean to live in the skins and the bodies that we actually live in.
Another piece with that multiverse too that I think is really stood out when I watched the film the first time in theaters was that when the moment when she walks out of the theater, or she's in the theater as like an actress version of herself, and then and this is the version that she's living without her husband, and then he walks up and he's also living this fantastic life, and that, like, if you are existing in a multiverse, everyone else also gets their own multiverse selves, and so your best life means that they're also living their best lives, and that felt much different from all the narratives where people go and explore some kind of surreal, like unlike A Christmas Carol, where he like stops existing or can see his life from a third perspective, or Groundhog's Day, but it's like one person, very subjective experience of their own life, their own inner struggles, and working through that. And this felt like it recognized that everyone was kind of going through these processes. The daughter is going through these processes too, the grandfather, and that felt unique in my views of multiverse narratives.
And I think in a lot of other multiverse narratives, the other realities are, there's usually something dire about them that has to be fixed somehow, but in this one, they're just all different. And some of them were not favorable. Some of them might not have been your favorite reality to be in, and some might have been a better reality to be in. But in the end, it was about somehow kind of living with all of them together. I also think it's interesting the negative reactions to the film. Like, have any of you had friends who disagreed with you about the quality of the film?
Well, we're not friends anymore if that happens. So I have seen a lot of criticism on like the A24 Facebook page, for example, of people saying that it wasn't something they could connect with, or that it was basically just like a failed postmodernist project, essentially. Like they didn't understand like that what's really important about this film is the fact that it's perfectly okay that she is the failed version of her multiple realities, and that her story is also important, and that's sort of the crux of the film. And they just seem to not get that, which I thought was interesting. I thought it was interesting reading through some comments. And some people just don't think that the the references to other films is, I guess, a valuable way to make a film, which I personally disagree with.
Yeah, it's interesting, Zebediah, that you are talking about people seeing it as some people seeing it as a failed postmodern film, and being put off by the references, a lot of the intertextual references to it. But I think that what's funny is that I think, like, if it really just was wanting to be a movie chock full of intertextuality, a whole bunch of people would have liked it for that.
The Ready Player One problem, I would call that. A lot of people liked Ready Player One because it's so chock full of 80s references, but they're
Yeah.
sort of meaningless in the
Right.
narrative. And I think this is the exact opposite of that, right? It's chock full of references, just like their previous film, Swiss Army Man, is chock full of references to like Jurassic Park and all these other things that they create out of garbage. This one's chock full of references they create out of the multiverse, and it's like deeply meaningful to the film.
Yeah, and I'm going out on a limb here, but I would almost say that because the film actually does want to be more than just the references, it somehow is making people realize that unconsciously, it's making them realize that a film should and could be more than references. And so then they take out, but they don't get all the way there with this film. And so they then accuse it of being nothing but references. Whereas I feel like if they were just watching a movie like a movie from the Scream franchise or something like that, they just take it on those terms, and they're like, oh, this is fun. But something about Everything Everywhere All at Once is that, like, if you don't get it all the way, it almost sets you up to be disappointed in certain ways, if that makes sense.
I mean, there was a sort of culture war is probably too big of a term for it, but there was a feud that I think Jamie Lee Curtis stoked a bit online about Everything Everywhere All at Once versus Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, because it's another multiverse sort of film that I have not seen, so I cannot speak on it. But as far as it's been portrayed to me, far less heart than this film. And so I think that something doesn't have to just be entertainment for entertainment's sake, or there doesn't be just visual, like, eye candy just for the sake of eye candy, that it could actually like hold some kind of heart, or actually be like utilitarian in some way, like used for some other purpose. Yeah.
I thought I'm having in regards to the references is, I mean, the most obvious one I think to most audiences is Ratatouille, in reference to Ratatouille, which feels, I'm like, that's actually the one that feels the least meaningful in terms of the themes of the movie, versus there's references to like Farewell My Concubine and these Asian films that are really important to the themes, and then there's this mistranslation of Ratatouille with a raccoon on a chef's head in a Japanese restaurant, and that what that one brings to mind, and this also feels like an important idea in metamodernism, is the like social utility of language, and that mistranslation and mispronunciations still have the role of connecting people. And so like she's a Malaysian actress, and in terms of her film career, Michelle Kwan, and then she's playing a Chinese woman who's working at a Japanese restaurant, and so there's these like multiple layers of ethnicity and confusion in an Asian American context that is presented. This Ratatouille scene is presented in, and then it's being mistranslated in language, and yet it's humorous, and it's the first scene where it feels like she's opening up to her family about her experience of this multiverse, too, and they're laughing at her, but it also is the first scene that it feels like, oh, they have like a family relationship. It felt warm for the first time. And I think as far as films, I was talking about in the Facebook group about Miyazaki, and someone kind of asking about whether that was metamodern, and my perspective was just like, Miyazaki itself is not metamodern, but I think Miyazaki's movies, Studio Ghibli's movies, and what has happened because we see them in translation, I think that influence is very metamodern, in that we are understanding things that are being translated in new ways, and experiencing the mistranslations as something that's meaningful, and that's influencing our influencing creators' works, influencing how we experience films and things. And so I think the Rakakuni reference really stands out for demonstrating that.
So is it sort of like a serendipity that ends up being kind of built into the reception of artworks that go across national and linguistic boundaries?
Yeah.
And instead of seeing that as an unfortunate failing of communication, it actually kind of creates an opportunity for meanings, multiple meanings, to be infused. Is that kind of?
Yeah, exactly. There's a poem that I read and heard the author discuss on a podcast called "The Mother Bomb," B-O-M-B, and it's like, it's a mistranslation her immigrant mother said of the mother balm, B-A-L-M, and she turns this mistranslation, or it's the other way around. It's called the mother balm, and her mother heard mother bomb, B-O-M-B, on the news, and then started saying the mother balm, and using that mistranslation to turn it into something meaningful, in her poem. And this feels similar, where it's like, no, I don't exactly understand what's being said, but I'm going to make something of it.
Yeah, kind of similar too. Like a lot of these references in Everything Everywhere All at Once went over my head because I'm not experienced in the different genres that it's referencing. And yet I don't feel like I had any less meaningful of an experience of the film than somebody that does get all those references. And it's probably got so many references in it that almost nobody besides the Daniels themselves can fully follow all of them. But there's something that's in and between all of those different references that, and anyone can get. And I think that's the heart of the film.
Something else I'm trying to understand, so in reading about how and thinking about how this film seems to be taken up right now, and what's different about right now than last year, the year before, etc. It seems like there's a sense that the film is valued because it's original and it's daring, and there's nothing like it. But in another era, it would have been thought of as, quote unquote, too bizarre. And but today, if something is quote unquote too bizarre, then maybe that equates in people's minds in an uncomfortable way to the Academy playing it safe and being too, stuck or stodgy. And that's something that there's maybe a little bit more push toward destodgifying. And one point that was made was there were other messagey films, but the message behind something like Top Gun or Avatar, very very overt messaging going on there, would be in messaging that was a little less comfortable, where the message behind Everything Everywhere All at Once turns out to be, I almost want to call it safe. It's a comfortable kind of messaging. So there's a way that we want to push for things that are innovative and new, but yet the messaging behind this one, prejudice is bad and moms are good, and it is really, really simple and really, in a way, safe, I guess. I just find that interesting.
Yeah, and also I haven't seen either of those two films that you mentioned. They're both sequels too, Top Gun and Avatar. But I imagine that their messaging was kind of a modernist sort of, just kind of straightforward. Here's the truth. Here's the message. Take it or leave it. Whereas everything everywhere all at once has the benefit of having its own kind of postmodern um, irony as an inoculation against a message being too on the nose. Um, and I think that's kind of a way that its metamodernism works in its favor as well.
I would say one of the messages that is not safe about the film is kind of a very Marxist message in the valuing of all the different labor. She like gains superpower, like basically superpowers at one point. And it's like from a sign spinner on the street. And another one's a singer, which is like more celebrated. But there's the Japanese chef, so it's especially immigrant labor roles, and that feels pretty different, and also a more complex relationship to the IRS than we're used to seeing in films. And if I was thinking about the films, I didn't see the films Linda mentioned either, but I think this year something with probably the most dangerous message would be Black Panther, with a very like anti-colonial stance and anti-colonial solidarity between different communities. And for whatever you think about Marvel, it was a very radical position for a film to take. But I would agree that like the moral arc of the film for Everything Everywhere All at Once is pretty traditional.
Should we wrap up? Does anybody have any other last thoughts we want to get in before we formally wrap up?
I wonder about the title of the title. It makes me wonder, makes me think of Miranda July, and it makes me wonder if the Daniels were influenced by Miranda July. Titles that of her films and texts, like "No One Belongs Here More Than You." What's another one? I'm blanking.
Me and You and Everyone We Know.
Me and You and Everyone We Know. Yeah, these kind of inclusive, purposely simple and inclusive kind of statement titles.
They are inclusive, and where I thought you were going with this, though, is they're also sort of like linguistically ostentatious and sort of juvenile at the same time. Like you're not supposed to have that many ands in a title, or even that many words, or start your sentence with me, or things like that. And and I think of like Dave Eggers' A Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius. And someone would have to write an essay to really explore this, but there's a kind of metamodern title that a lot of like metamodern indie rock bands, have these crazy long titles to their albums and things like that, or Sufjan Stevens. So there's something metamodern in the like epicness and sort of ridiculousness at the same time of these kind of titles.
I'd be curious if one of the short films that was nominated was Metamodern, considering its title. I don't remember it verbatim, but it was something along the lines of, "An ostrich told me I'm in a short film and I think I believe it." Like, it's just something ridiculous. I'm like, I gotta go check that out.
That sounds metamodern.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Linda, you were saying, I wonder if the Daniels were influenced by Miranda July, and what that just strikes to me is like, I so wish that we could actually talk to them and really like find out what they did have in mind, and in terms of all of these things that we think of as being metamodern, and how much do they know about the theory and whatnot. So if anybody watching this knows them, put us in touch. Yeah, say hi.
Did you want to say anything about the speeches at all? We didn't really talk about the speeches, the Oscar speeches.
I would love it if somebody else wanted to.
I think there was something really important. They all talked about inclusivity and just being able to express yourselves and having the support of your parents. Like when the Daniels were talking, I think during their writing speech, and talking about how, you know, they were supported by their mom when they were dressing in drag and putting on shows and getting in trouble and you know, getting suspended from school and like all these things, right? The kids go through, but they had the support. They didn't have some of the attacks that are happening politically and socially currently. And so I think just calling that stuff out and saying, you know, this is a moment where we're winning that kind of battle against these sort of extremes, I think was really important. And then Ke Huy Quan in his speech talking about, you know, I am the American dream because I'm an immigrant, I was a refugee, I was forgotten for 25 years because I was, you know, too Asian or whatever to make it in Hollywood, and here I am now, right? Those sort of moments I think were really, really, really important.
Yeah, and he also kind of spoke to something that everybody could relate to, even the, you know, whitest, malest, cis, straightest, wealthy person is, look at me, I just fucking won an Oscar. Like, which that's out of reach, you know, should be out of reach to anybody, no matter what advantages you come into life with. And I'm sure he's not the first person, you know, on the Oscars to say something like that, but there was just something really impassioned about the way he expressed that, that again, I think kind of like speaks to like the universality of everybody feeling like they're just a little tiny cog in the wheels of all the stuff going on, and yet we're also all, you know, kind of the hero of the story and of our own story.
Speaking of the hero and the story bit, we have to talk about Lady Gaga for a minute, probably, right?
Talk about Lady Gaga.
Going off topic from the film, but the performance of Lady Gaga in the song performance at the Oscars. Yeah, the song performance. Okay, now I'm just blanking on.
Greg, she was wearing the outfit that you're wearing right now.
Yeah,
that's true.
I actually didn't know that was her at first.
I didn't either. And
I was thinking,
started, I was like,
yeah, I was thinking like, you know, way to go, like some chick, some, you know, Brooklyn singer songwriter is getting to do this song at the Oscars, and I'm like, oh, she's got some pipes, she's pretty good, the song's pretty decent. And then I realized it was Lady Gaga. And so Linda, what is that? What are your thoughts?
Well, just that she took the, you know, the sort of momentum. The Oscars has a momentum that it revolves around the glitz and the glamour and the recognition of celebrity and all this kind of stuff, and just like dials it down to the comments that she made right before she began her song were very quiet. They weren't calling out into the back row. She's sitting down, not standing up, being, you know, on display, wearing torn jeans and Converse high tops and a black t-shirt, and not only no makeup, but like sort of like crusty, non-freshed up lipstick. So it was just
like
anti-makeup in a way. Yeah. And just sort of changed the whole tenor of the moment to be personal, because she said this song is deeply personal to me. And so she was sort of reflecting just a really small moment that you're having with your own self and your own jeans and no makeup and stuff. And then of course she busts out the pipes and does that contrast. But yeah, I just thought that was a unique moment as well in this Oscars. Well, thank you everyone for talking with us about this film and about the phenomenon of the Oscars 2023. It was really fun to have the conversation, and hopefully we can have some more conversations about metamodern cultural products and their effects on our contemporary world and on ourselves. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.